So let me share with the staff and doctors specifically why we need to role play and how we can increase our communication, not just with staff and doctors, but with patients. So let's go into major considerations of how we learn and develop new skills, which is paramount because training is paramount to anything and to be successful at anything, especially running a chiropractic office. So having said that, let's go into some of these major categories of communication to be aware of, okay? So first of all, if there's 4 levels of awareness, we need to be, now this becomes very important relative to training. So the first stage is unconscious incompetence. And that's one of the worst phases to be in because that's when you don't even know what you don't know. Then there's conscious incompetence. So now you know what you don't know, but you can't do it. And then there's conscious competence. You know it, you can do it, but you're not real good at it, but you can do it. And then there's unconscious competence. And that's like when you can just do it without even thinking about it. So obviously, every skill set in a chiropractic office, from patient education to communication with the patients, all of these should be at an unconscious competence level. That's what they, in other words, all of these systems from, the 10 unique days the patient comes through the office to the marketing systems, all of them should be at a state of unconscious competence for the highest, most effective level of a successful practice and a patient experience. Now, having said that, we'll go in a little bit deeper in that in just a second, but let's go to number 2 here. It says effectiveness of learning. So when we read things, we only really absorb 10% of it. When we hear it, 20%. When we see it, 30%. When we do and say something, 90%. So if we were going to pick one of these methods to learn, it's going to be do and say. Now that's called motor and sensory. What that means is you're using your muscles and sensations simultaneously. So that has the greatest impact. And it has even a greater impact when you use motor and sensory and you do it over 21 days, because that's what develops a neural filament. Doing the same thing goes over 21 days, muscle sensory. That's what creates habits. So this is why role playing is so important. And so a lot of times when we start trying to learn a new skill, we'll typically have the staff maybe read something or watch videos, and then we'll role play, and then we'll role play small amounts, and we'll role play it multiple times. See, this is how we can take any topic that we want to be good at and move it from a state of unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. This is why role playing is so important relative to the skill set of running a business. And then we want to be aware of styles of communication, that the lowest level of communication is verbal. That's only 7%. Tone is 36%. So I'm sure you've been places before and people have said the right words, but they said it in a bad tone, and so you were offended. See, so tone is way more important than the words. And then, of course, visuals, the greatest, 55%. That's why more people will watch TV than listen to the radio. So these are the forms of communication for how we absorb information. So we're going to pay attention to all of these, but we do want to pay attention to the words we say. We want to pay attention to the tone and how we say it, and especially visual. So we pay a lot of attention to visual, especially when we're doing patient communication. There's a tremendous amount of visualization and reinforced visualization because of this, because of the effectiveness of communication using visual aids. And then there's styles of interaction. So there's kinesthetic, there's audio and visual. So what does kinesthetic mean? Well, those are people that talk with their hands. A lot of times we call those touchy-feely people. We got to be real careful. We got to be real careful with that in today's society of overstepping somebody's bounds. A kinesthetic person nowadays can get in trouble. They don't think they're doing anything untoward, but the other person, doesn't necessarily like them touching them. So this is a big issue, and it needs to be paid a lot of attention to. So, um, and then there's the audio styles of communication. We pay attention to the audio and the visual. And this is why a lot of times we'll when we're doing training, we'll use multiple. We'll break it into small parts. We'll do sensory and motor, and we'll do a lot of repetition. This is why. And we'll do a lot of visualization likewise. Now it gets to the next part, which is really important, which is the personality styles. And we spend a lot of time not only understanding the staff personality styles, all the staff obviously should know their primary and secondary personality styles, the doctor's personality styles. And a matter of fact, the staff should be able to easily determine the patient's personality styles after they've been trained. And the reason for that is we communicate differently based on our personality styles. So as an example, there's four major, we use the DISC profile, DISC. And so that's the sanguine, choleric, melancholy, or phlegmatic. Or the D is the dominant, that's the choleric. DI, interrelator, is the sanguine. Steady relator is the melancholy, and the cautious thinker is the phlegmatic. So that's how it corresponds with DISC. But essentially, what we're dealing with is you have a sanguine personality or the interlater that um, they're everywhere. They're the life of the party, and they're happy, happy, chatty, Cathy, and they're lively, and they talk, they enjoy talking. And now, what's so important about that person is we got to be highly aware to confine them and reel them in and bring them back because they're constantly going to multiple topics, whether it's checking out at the front desk. That's the person that'll check out at the front desk and stand there for 20 minutes talking. So we have to know how to confine them and reel them in. Same with patients, or they'll just go everywhere. Uh, Same with the choleric personality. That's the person who's direct. So we have to know if that person's a choleric personality. We got to be direct and to the point. And the melancholy, they like details. So if it's a melancholy patient, and this is real important with hiring too. I mean, it'd be terrible to hire a sanguine personality, somebody who's very people oriented and talkative and interactive, and then put them in a cubicle by themselves. That just won't work out. So this, relating the job, the personalities to the specific job responsibilities is a major factor to the success of any business. So we pay a lot attention to make sure the staff are familiar with themselves first, then they're familiar with the doctor's personality, because it makes it a lot easier to understand people and get less upset if you just understand them. If you don't, you think everybody should think and talk like you. And that's just not how the world works. And you're in for a lot of disappointment if you continue that thought process. So it diminishes the um, friction with the staff and diminishes the friction with the doctor. It significantly enhances the communication with the patients. So that's the importance of, all these factors. So melancholy, and then there's the phlegmatic. Phlegmatic is the real passive, easygoing person. Well, they need a lot of support. They need a lot of reaffirmation when we're doing patient education or talking money or time or whatever. So, and obviously we go into a lot of the personality styles in great detail just on its own. We'll go through that just on its own in great detail. But these are the main considerations that we want to pay attention to and how they're affecting, whether the staff is being hired for certain positions and responsibilities, how the doctor interacts with the staff and why it becomes major. In other words, when I interacted with my staff, it was real important if I knew I was dealing with a sanguine or melancholy or choleric type staff member, because that's how I would talk to them in accordance. It'd be relative to their personality. So, same with the patients. So it's everybody. It's the staff understanding themselves. It's the staff with the doctor. It's the staff. It's the doctor with the staff. It's the staff with the patients. So it enhances all the relationships. So same thing when we talk about styles of interaction, when we talk about styles of communication, This is all part of the training process. And then what's really important is understanding the levels of awareness. And I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into this. So when we're in a state of unconscious competence, so if we have staff, especially this is important with new staff members. So how are we going to take new staff members and process them through to where they're essentially really good at that job responsibility? Well, the first thing is they're going to be at a state of unconscious incompetence. So this is when we'll apply books, seminars, and tapes. So typically here is when we'll have them read the manual, read the material, read the office manual, and watch videos of what should be done. So that's kind of the first phase. Now that takes them to conscious incompetence. So now they're aware of it, but that doesn't mean they can do it. Whether it's answering the phone, how to collect money, how to schedule appointments, these things. Okay, how to do the marketing, what to say, when to say it, all that stuff. Okay, so that takes us to the conscious incompetence level. So we want to get from conscious incompetence with that skill set to conscious competence. Now, there's several things that have to be done from a training perspective. Number one is we got to break it down to its lowest components. So if something feels too big to attempt, it needs to be broken down. If it still feels too big to attempt, it needs to be broken down. In other words, whatever the material is that's being covered, it needs to be totally broken down till it does not feel the first step. In other words, we're going to break it down into multiple steps. And we're going to break that step down until it's absolutely minor and no big deal to take the first step. So that becomes paramount. So we may have to break down the material quite a bit, okay, which is no problem. All right, that's number one. Number two is we have to role play it. First, we want to use sensory and motor, and then we have to role play it, and we got to role play it several times. So we're taking a little baby step, and then we're going to role play it, because we want to get that little baby step to conscious competence. That's the whole goal. It's not to jump to unconscious competence. It's to get to conscious competence, because if you get there, you'll at least do the activity. Most people never get to conscious competence and they talk themselves out of it. They can't do it, and then they quit, and then they blame other people and other things. Well, this is how we stop all this from happening.